At this time, I take great pride in introducing our guest speaker. Our guest speaker tonight is one with an overabundance of blessing. He is sensitive to what is going on around him and constantly delving for changes and solutions. He's uniquely caring and talented. He is a successful man by all accounts, yet one deeply committed to the cause of others. He is a member of the Nassau County Bar Association and New York State Bar Association. Tireless advocate for social justice issues and individual rights. Dynamic human services background as an elder advocate, substance abuse counselor, hospital and prison chaplain and housing advocate, naturalist, orator, scholar, educator, journalist. Ladies and gentlemen, may we welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Francis McQuade.
It is so great to be here tonight in the most exciting city of the world, the most exciting people of the world, you. I want to thank right at the outset our waiters of the food and the service of beverage tonight, all the people from the Ramada Plaza who set up such a beautiful banquet hall tonight. Thank you very much for your service. You know, there's a story of a jester, a court jester of a king of a kingdom many years ago, and he was walking across the court plaza. And from the distance, he saw the king. And the king was a man who was robust, portly, we'll say corpulent. This very heavy-set king, he had bent over to pick up something that had fallen to the fieldstone floor of the courtroom plaza. And the jester, being a jester, could not resist coming up behind the king who had bent over and pinching his derriere. Well, the king leapt to his feet and twirled around with robes of flying. But the king said, "You fool, for this you shall lose your head." Now the jester realized he had done something very wrong, so he dropped to his knees. And he scrambled for an apology. And trying to save face, the jester finally came up with something, said, "Your Majesty, I'm sorry. I thought it was the Queen." And the moral of the story is sometimes the apology is worse than the insult. You know, Gandhi had once said there were three great sins: commerce without compassion, politics without principle, and religion without worship. All of our social ills are rooted in our humanity. And all of our social solutions are rooted in our humanity. In other words, the very humanity that sometimes renders us like animals and other times raises us up to just a notch below angels. Our very humanity is responsible for the things that go wrong, and also it's the key to the solutions of the things that go right. There's no sin in being poor, there's no sin in being old, there's no sin in almost anything, as long as the apology does not compound the felony. In a sense, it's our response to the social ills that bring our city down, that bring our families down, that wreak havoc among our personal relationships. Very often it's the apology, if insincere, if disingenuous, if floundering to pass the blame, if the apology is feeble, then indeed it could be worse than the insult. What are the social ills? Poverty, racism, poor treatment of our children, neglect of the elderly, the laid waste of our natural environment. And because of our humanity, because of our imperfection, we're going to make mistakes. And whether it's government, or whether it's private industry, or whether it's individuals living in family, we're all responsible to summon more than an apology, more than a feeble excuse, but rather a best effort in correcting those social ills. And I want to propose 4 things that I think are such valuable tools, changing the face of this city and changing the face of this nation, making our homes more peaceful and loving places. The first thing I'd like to suggest is that truth is absolute. That there are some things that are absolutely true and some things that are absolutely not true. And the corollary of that suggestion is that words have meaning. And no matter how you play with words, no matter what additional meanings you give it, no matter how you try to color the language, the word, the truth, the absolute truth with gloss, with alibi, that there is absolute truths in the world and you stand by those absolute truths. And you don't allow anyone to try to change language to make good bad and bad good. It was Pope Pius XII who had said that this generation is, during the Second World War, in the midst of the terrible Nazi Holocaust, he said that this generation is no less depraved than any other generation before. That the only difference was that this was the first generation, said he, was where good was described as bad and bad was described as good. That whole dynamic of how Hitler was able to describe the necessary evils for the good of the state. That whole change of terms, that newspeak that Joseph Stalin and international communism had followed up with. And what we call the political correctness, which is really suffocation of truth, when the absolute truth of concepts that are well-founded in our traditions and our beliefs and what we crave as people are dumbfounded by a twisting of language and an casuistic existentialism of the moral values that we've always held. The second tool to reforming, reinvigorating, and renewing the face of our city, our nation, our families, ourselves, is a sense of beauty. That we could see something and to say, indeed, it looks fine. This hall looks fine. That piece of art looks good. That environment looks pristine. If we don't have a sense of beauty, we're not going to be able to draw the line in the ground and saying, this is what we strive for. But rather, we find ourselves on the slippery slope of, I guess that's okay if they say it's okay, or it's all in the mind of the perceiver. Art and beauty has, again, an absolute value. And the value is an appreciation of the aesthetic. The ability and the discipline to go out and seek the aesthetic, to seek the beautiful, to refresh yourself in a scene that's beautiful, in a place that's calm, somewhere that will relieve the stress of the immediate and recharge you to do your duty back in your job and your families and where you find yourself. The third tool I'd like to suggest is a sense of humor. So very often, we lack that sense of humor because of the gravity of the very serious events and the very serious circumstances that cause us so much concern in our daily lives. But a sense of humor preserves a context, preserves the parameters of sanity and peace that allows us not to take ourselves terribly serious, but to take the gravity of our mission very serious, while we just humble servants towards moving towards the goal of resolving the ills of society, a sense of humor. Francois, the Duke of Rochefoucauld, once said, "Don't be humble, you're not great enough." In other words, humility is for those who are truly great. If I was a 98-pound weakling, and God knows that I should be, at least a little bit towards that, but if I was a very small man and I came up against a big man who brandished a weapon at me and I said, I'll give you a break, I'm not going to hit you, that's not humility, because I couldn't do damage. But if you're a great person, if you're in a position to make change, and you say, I'll allow you the flexibility, I'll try to encourage change, I'll forgive you, that is humility. And that's the fourth tool I'd like to suggest in my blueprint for changing the face of this nation, changing the face of this city, and restoring peace and prosperity in your homes, and that's humility. You know, humility hasn't always been a value, hasn't always been a virtue. We read in the Hebrew scriptures that humility never is mentioned as something good, because humility used to be considered something like you're miserly. If you don't flaunt it, if you don't show it, and they say maybe that the guy's holding something back. But it's only in much more recent times, and we may say it's a revelation of Christ in the Christian scriptures, or perhaps it's just the Renaissance philosophy. Humility has become a virtue. What a wonderful virtue it is. Humility puts us in a position where we want to serve rather than feel that we have to serve. Humility, in which we recognize in ourselves that we're wounded healers, in the terminology of Henri Nouwen, talked about wounded healers. There's a wonderful story about a sculptor in Milan, and he had a big block of marble. And there was a little boy that used to hang around the square where the artists in that great Renaissance artistic city in northern Italy would stay. And the little boy saw him starting to chip away at this, just a square of marble. Beautiful Tuscan marble with the green grain and the great white bright coming out. And the little boy left for the summer. And there was 3 months later, he came back. And when he came back, he saw the artist was almost finished, and there was a lion, great features and a robust mane. And the little child looked and he said, last I saw there was a block of marble, and now I see a lion that was going to be put in front of a great building. And he went up to the artist and tugged his tunic and he said, how did you know there was a lion in that block? And that's really humility. How do you know there's a lion in the heart of a poor man? How do you know there's a lion in someone who's 80, 90 years old? How do you know there's a lion in your heart? You know it by humility. It's a humility because you know what you do. You know how hard you work. And you know that if you work so hard, but yet that you're so humble, you know there's great things you can accomplish. And all of us here are in a unique position to change the face of our nation, of our city, of our homes. If we're doctors, we have the gift of healing, or nurses as well. If we're lawyers, we have the great gift of Solomon, justice, in our hands. If we're home care workers, we have the loving touch of being attendant to people who are so badly sick and infirm. Or whatever your line of work and your march of life should be, what a great gift you have. You have the lion in your heart, and you are able to take from that solid block of daily life, that monolith of problems and social ills, and to bring the lion out by being receptive and wise to the fact that in everyone's heart there exists that lion. And whether your religious profession this week motivates you to declare Christ incarnate, God and man, or a miracle of lights. Whatever that profession is, my dear friends, I ask you to use it this week as your tool to empower you to new heights of service, of love, and of power and justice for this coming year. I wish you all the most merriest of holidays, the happiest of New Year's, to Harry and Harry's Nurses Registry, a very successful year of loving service to the people of God in New York City. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frank McQuade. I must say you're a very tough